Okay, so here we go. So the focus today is obviously AI literacy, because AI Literacy Day, but we're focusing on AI integration specifically into the classroom and how we can be very strategic and optimize that. So obviously, I will be sharing the slides with you along with the recording. The first thing we need to do, like whatever a teacher plans to integrate AI into their lessons, is we need some sort of grounding, right? Some sort of theory as to what is learning. So one that is very common, I'm sure you're familiar with, is Vygotsky. And as you know, or the way Vygotsky describes learning is that process where we help students go from their current level of development to the next level of development, or what he calls their proximal level of development. And as I'm sure you know, that level of development is one that is distant enough that they are not yet able to solve those problems at that level, but it's not so distant that they are completely unable to do it. But the key is they can solve those problems with the help of technology and or with the help of what Vygotsky calls a more knowledgeable other. The nice thing with AI is that it can be both it is both a technology and can act as a more knowledgeable other. So what happens when you provide technological help and a more knowledgeable other, whether it's the teacher, a peer, or whatever it might be, is you provide some level of scaffolding. And what that does is the students can focus on some of the understanding, skills, or dispositions that are needed at that next level, right? So it might be that they can do all the things that are needed, but not all at once, right? They can only do them one by one. So by providing that scaffolding, you can help them solve problems at a higher level than what they are actually capable of. So that might sound a bit abstract, but there's a very simple way to visualize that. So if you look at that video on kids learning how to do a backflip, that can be sort of a metaphor for AI integration in learning. So what happens here is if you don't know how to do a backflip, there are some things you need to learn, right? One is you need to learn not to be afraid to jump towards the back when you don't know how you're going to do that safely, right? So there's the fear that you need to overcome. Then there's the sort of motor memory of the movements, and then there's sort of the strength that you need to have. What that little tool does is it takes away the fear, right? The students feel supported and they have the mat, so the fear goes away, right? So now they can focus on the two other things, which are the movement and the sort of muscle memory and the strength. Now, at that point, they might not have the muscle that are needed yet. They might be able to do the movement, but they can only do that if they have the support. And as you provide that support, at some point, they will be able to do it so well with that little tool here that if you remove the tool, they can still do it just by themselves, but they could only get there with that support. So that's a good metaphor for what we want to try and do when we integrate AI into teaching and learning. And what we want to have in mind is whenever we integrate AI into our lessons, it can have a positive impact or a negative impact on all of those things, right? So it can increase students' sense of autonomy. They feel like they are more in charge, and that is, according to self-determination theory, that's more motivating. So they feel they have more autonomy. They might feel like they are more competent because they can now solve problems and experience. They have that high level of success that they wouldn't have if they didn't have that help. They can have both autonomy and success because they have support, right? Maybe the AI can explain things, be adaptive in the kind of questions that it asks, etc. So because they have both the support and the autonomy, they can have that competence. And then through that, they can develop those foundational skills, like the kid learning the backflip, but also it can be an extension. So they can develop those high order skills. So AI can do all of those things, and you can also do the opposite. It's very easy to imagine a scenario where a teacher, very well intentioned, integrates AI into their lesson and actually takes away from the autonomy. The student feels like they're not doing anything anymore, the AI is doing everything for them. So the real fun that there was is lost. They might feel like they are less competent because they're not actually learning, they just have the AI do the stuff for them. They might feel like they have no support because they are now spending a lot of time on their computers by themselves, not interacting with peers, and maybe not even getting as much interaction with their teacher as before. Right? So we can very easily imagine AI supporting autonomy, supporting competence, or the opposite. And it's also very easy to imagine AI hindering the development of foundational skills, or even the development of higher order skills. We can imagine the kids learning how to do things with AI and never learning the basic skills that would allow them to, at some point, not need that scaffold anymore. Or we can imagine that they never develop the higher order conceptual or critical thinking skills, again, if we don't integrate AI intentionally. So that was a long introduction, but that gives us a good framework for what we want to try and do when we integrate AI. The goal is, since we know that it has all those potential benefits, but also all of those risks, what we are trying to do is find a way to integrate AI that maximizes all of the benefits. Right? It supports autonomy, it provides more support, it supports competence, it ensures the development of foundational skills, it provides options for higher order skills. So we maximize those benefits and we minimize the risks. We are very intentional not to introduce AI in ways that might undermine autonomy, support, competence, foundational skills, or higher order skills, right? So theoretically, that's what we want to try and do. The question is, well, in practical terms, how do we do that, right? So that's what I like to call fine-tuning. And if you're not familiar with the term in the context of AI, usually it's used when we fine-tune a model. So what happens when we do that is the model is already has already been put at pre-trained, right? So the model can be used and create outputs. Fine-tuning means we're going to further train the model for a specific context or specific use cases. And that's essentially what we're going to be doing with the different AI tools that we can use in the classroom. We'll make sure we fine-tune their use so they are specifically designed or used in a way that is designed for education to maximize benefits and to minimize risks, right? So we might use tools as they are. For this particular session, we're not creating our own tools necessarily. We can use the tools that just exist out there, but the way we use them is fine-tuned to support educational outcomes. So I think there's a simple step-by-step process that any teacher can go through to fine-tune AI integration and, again, maximize benefits and minimize risks. So I'm going to go through each step. And what might be useful for you is try to think of either an incoming lesson, so a lesson you're going to teach soon, or maybe a lesson that you're designing right now, and try and think, okay, how might I follow those steps and integrate AI strategically in that next lesson. So it's very small, it's hard to read, but the first step, obviously, just like whenever we design a lesson, is we start with the end in mind. So we start with the learning objectives. Right? They might have different names in different schools, but essentially, we look at what is my desired end outcome. What do I want the students to learn through that lesson or through that unit if I'm designing for a unit? To give an example, that's just an example, I could imagine a situation where a teacher would say, my goal for this lesson or those sets of lessons or this unit is I want students to be able to critically analyze a primary source using the OPVL model. Right? That's the first step there. My next step is I'm going to think, what is my pedagogical process? which simply means how is either my unit structured or how are my lessons structured. Just basically what is the sequence of steps that I have planned for my students to go through to achieve those outcomes. That's going to depend on your school. That is going to depend on your own philosophy as a teacher. It depends, do you follow Marzano? Do you follow Gagne? Do you follow, whoever it might be? Just to give an example, obviously you would adapt that to your own context, but one example could be the teacher saying, so to achieve that goal of the kids learning how to critically analyze a source, I will first have some sort of an engaging activity that explains why it's relevant and gets them excited about source analysis, right? So some sort of an engagement activity. Then I will somehow have them access the model, the OPVL, and learn what O, P, V, and L stand for and how to conduct an OPVL analysis. Right, so I'm going to explain that, share that with them. Then they're going to practice, and they're going to practice with some level of support. And then at the end, I want to be able to collect feedback on how well they're doing, what further teaching might be needed, what some extensions might be possible for some sort of data gathering that helps me, like a check for understanding, that helps me know how to plan my next lesson. All right, so that might be my pedagogical process. Engaging activity, accessing the model, if it's the first time we're introducing that model. Then they practice with some support, and then I get feedback to know how effective my teaching was and what my next steps might be. Right? So those are my first steps, learning outcomes, and then the process. The third step is the critical one, or the AI fine-tuning. That's where I'm going to brainstorm how might AI help, or how might AI derail each of those steps, right? So for instance, so as you can see, like for each of the steps, I have a green option, which is when AI enhances learning, helps enhance learning. And the red one would be when the opposite happens and AI either impairs learning or replaces learning or somehow derails the learning process. So for engagement, for instance, I might be able to use AI in a way that is going to make the learning more engaging and more relevant. So that would support learning. It could be the opposite. It could be that by introducing AI in a particular tool in a particular way at that stage, actually takes away from the agency of the students, takes away from peer interaction, and makes that engagement less engaging, right? So I want to make sure I go for the first option of more relevant. Same thing for the next step. When I share the model with students, I might be able to do that in a way that makes the learning more active. So it's less frontal teaching. There's more active learning on the part of the students. It might be more adapted, or I might be able to differentiate. So here AI would help enhance learning, but the opposite could happen. It could be the case that if I don't do it well, AI actually undermines the learning that I want to happen. For instance, because it does the OPVL for the students and they never understand how to do it by themselves, right? So I'm not going to continue, but basically you would do that for each step. For each step in my process, try to predict what might go well if I maximize the benefits of AI, what might be a risk if I don't do it strategically enough. So again, first step, my learning objectives. Second step, what is my learning sequence or my process? Third step, for each of those, how might AI help? And then the next step is going to be when I make my choices. So that's where I decide where am I going to use AI and which AI and how, right? So again, this is just an example. I'm going to show you some of the options, but it will look different for every lesson, for every teacher. So for my engagement activity, I might think introducing AI at this point, there's too high of a risk that it takes away from the whole point, which is to make that introduction activity engaging for students. If I want it to be engaging, I want them to interact. I want it to be a face-to-face interaction between peers. So I'm not going to have AI there for the students. I might still use AI as a teacher to brainstorm some engaging activities for them, but I really want to then just have an interactive activity between them, right? For the next step, which is when I share the OPVL framework with them, here I might be able to find ways where AI makes the learning more active. So the students are actively engaging with the model, even though they don't know it yet. So that's that Vygotsky proximal level of development, right? They don't know PVL, so that's not in their current zone of development, but that's proximal for them. They don't know the PVL framework yet. But with the help of technology and a more knowledgeable other, which would be an AI tool in this case, they can do primary source analysis. And through that process, they can learn how to do it by themselves. So here's what that might look like. So I need to, let me click on the actual link here. So this is a very, very simple tool that I created for this purpose. If you're interested in how to do it, again, there's that session at 11:40. So in about 3 hours, 3 hours and 10 minutes on learning how to do that. But it's a very simple and free tool that you can use to create the same sort of GPT assistant. So when you create your own chatbot, the benefit of this particular tool is they can be quite powerful with many functionalities, and you can share them with your students, and it can be used for free, right? So in this particular example, the student would share a source. So for instance, if the student is so let's say the teacher gave me that particular source that I need to analyze. So what it will do is it will help me do the analysis sort of step by step, explaining to me what each step is. So starting with the O in the origin, and it's really going to not only have those sort of baby steps, but really like walk me through the process, right? So at this stage, I'm perceive at the backflip analogy that we looked at. I have a high level of support, right? The benefit compared to not using AI here is the alternative would really be the teacher just walking me through, like lecturing me. Okay, here's what O is. It means origin is just lecturing me. Here there's a higher level of engagement on the part of the students where they are actively learning. With this tool, I can help and answer all the questions of all the students, right? If a student had further questions, it would be hard for me as a teacher to answer the 25 questions of the 25 kids, or maybe they will not ask those questions. Here, the interaction is one-on-one, so the students can get the greater level of support and the personalized support from AI. And obviously, I can provide the source, but I can also give them the option to choose their own source to analyze, right? Because at this point, what matters is not so much that the source is a relevant historical source. It could be any primary source. I just want them to know about the OPVL framework, right? So this would be, go back here, one example of at that second step, which is when I have students access the learning, I use AI, but I use AI very strategically in a way where I'm sure that it makes learning more active. I'm sure that it makes learning more adapted to student needs, and it does not undermine foundational knowledge acquisition or skills acquisition, because quite the opposite, it walks students through the steps. So it doesn't give them the answer, it walks them through acquiring those skills. Then my next step, again, just an example, but my next step in the process is having students practice the OPVL framework once they have discovered it. So here, I might be tempted to use AI again, But if I look at my framework, I need to remember there is a risk that AI will undermine the development of skills, and even more so, higher order skills. So while it was strategic to use AI as a first step for students to discover and engage with the model, once they have reached that understanding of what OP, what origin, purpose, value, limitations, once they know what that means, once they have done a couple examples with the AI, they should be able to do it by themselves. Right? They should be able to do an autonomous OPVL, maybe with a peer, but not with AI help. If they can't yet, then they still need to be at that previous stage, right? But I'm not going to have AI at that stage because that would not be strategic. That would likely, there's a greater risk that it will undermine learning than a potential benefit that it will enhance learning at that particular stage. And then my last step is providing feedback. So here again, I might decide that AI can enhance that step. So I might use AI to collect student feedback, or I might decide that it's not what I want, depending on the kind of feedback that I'm looking for. So one example that I have. So one example here is that is a different tool or another assistant I created with the same tool that I did the OPVL assistant with. And so this one, what it does is it gives feedback to students on their OPVL analysis, right? So I would say, okay, here's what my source, here's my analysis, give me feedback on how well I did, right? That allows me, through the assistant, to give feedback to all of my students on their learning that day. And the way that particular tool is designed, I have visibility as a teacher on how well they did. So they get feedback from the AI, but I can go back and see what they did and what kind of feedback they got. So that one would be strategic. Another one, this one, is a tool for me as a teacher to get feedback from the students, right? So here, they're going to tell me basically, I'm going to check if they understand the OPVL framework and what kind of feedback do they have. So if you're not familiar with it, this one is called School AI, which you can use as most of those tools. There's a freemium model where you have access with a free subscription to quite a few options. And then some require, if you want more options, you need to pay for it, but the free tier is quite generous. So the point here is, for that last step, which is providing feedback, I need to be very strategic. AI can absolutely help develop metacognition and higher order thinking if I use it for that purpose. It might also undermine higher order thinking. So while I might use AI for feedback, I need to make sure it's been designed by me and is used by me to facilitate that metacognition and higher order thinking, not the other way, right? Not undermine it. And so this would be, I'll go back to this in a second. This would be the model that I suggest teachers use when they plan AI integration to maximize all of its benefits, to avoid and mitigate its risks. Again, starting with what are my learning objectives for my students? Then what are the steps that I want them to go through? So that's basically the plan for my lesson or the plan for my unit. The steps I need them to go through to achieve those objectives. Then for each of those steps, how might AI help? How might AI hinder or distract or undermine? And then strategically deciding based on those potential benefits and potential risks at each step, deciding which AI tool to use, how to use it, or at a sort of higher level, and again, that will be the next session at 11:40, designing or creating my own tools to make sure they are not only used, but also designed and created for that specific purpose, so that I make sure, because I created them for that purpose, and make sure that they support and don't hinder learning. So again, I will be sharing the the slides with you. I have come to believe that AI is not a toolkit. It's more of a tool maker. Again, that's why there will be the session at 11:40. But still, it's always useful to have a sort of an AI toolbox or repertoire. So in case you're interested, you will have the link here to a document we use at my school that gives you our philosophy of teaching and learning, which might not be overly useful for you, because that's just the way we approach learning. We call that the ASP way. But for each of those, it will give you tools that students can use, right? So to give an example, one thing that we do is obviously ensuring our learning environment is inclusive. So we might need and provide some assistive technologies. Well, one that we can help students with is AudioPen, right, which is essentially a speech-to-text tool that students can use. And not only does it transcribe what students say into words, but it rephrases their words so that it's more concise, more clear, and more organized. So for students who, because of a learning difference or at a particular point in their learning development, have the ideas, have the understandings, but still struggle with expressing that clearly, if my learning objective is not communication, I'm not grading how clear you are, I'm just wondering, like, do you understand? Do you have that conceptual understanding? Then that tool might help them demonstrate that they have the understanding. We will still need to work with them on how do you make your learning clear, organized, and concise, but that's a different lesson. That's a different learning objective. For that, if I'm right now focusing on conceptual understanding, then that tool might be useful. So again, you will have access to that list. And what I would suggest is once you go through your learning objectives, the steps, then how might AI help or hinder, and then when you choose your tools and which to use and how to use them, maybe go through that list and your own toolbox and see which one are suited. That's how you fine-tune AI integration. And then over time, that becomes a habit that you have, where you know when I have this type of activity, that's the benefit of AI, and here's a tool that I can use, and here's how I can use it to avoid those risks and leverage all of the potential they have. So again, when I show the slides, you will have this one with you, which you can use to sort of brainstorm and fine-tune your integration. You will also have a link here, sorry, to an assistant you might want to use. It's a different tool. It's also free to use. And you could create your own, but what it does is it basically helps you go through that model, but much faster because it does some of the legwork. So while it's the best practice to go through each step and really plan thoughtfully your AI integration, the reality is we are also time is scarce for teachers. So if you need to be very efficient and need some help, you enter here your learning outcome. So what it will do is it will give you we will have you brainstorm some do's and don'ts. So some ways AI might have potential and help, and so some ways might undermine, and it will suggest some tools that you can use, right? So for instance, if I go right here, so we would say, so for your engaging middle, which is that middle part of the lesson where students are engaging with the material, here are some things that you might want to do, and then some things that you want to avoid when using AI. So that helps you not only choose what tool to use, but also be very thoughtful and strategic as to when I use it, what are some things that I should do to leverage its benefits, some things I should avoid because it also comes with risks, obviously. And then, so we are nearing the end of this presentation, but I want to share with you briefly two other ways you can use that same model for two other purposes. So we saw how you can use it to plan very intentionally how to integrate AI into your units or lesson plans. You can also use it for assessment when you plan your assessments. And that would be instead of more, I was going to say traditional, they're not really traditional because they just came up recently, but I'm sure you're familiar with those AI scales, which when they were first proposed by Leon First, it was a great advancement, and that was very useful. So I do think they have benefits and they can serve a purpose. I think we can do better though. And the reason briefly is when you have that AI scale for an assessment, you have just by definition, because it's a scale, you have only one level. So you would say let's say my unit culminates in a research paper that has to involve source analysis. I can only say for this assessment, you can use this level of AI, let's say level 3. That's one-dimensional. I think that's not enough to really fine-tune AI integration. What you can do when you fine-tune is not only have one level of AI per assessment, but one level for each step in the assessment and for each learning objective. So what that might look like is, if I go back here, imagine that each of the steps here is not a step in my lesson, but is a step that students have to go through to complete the assessment. So for instance, you have to research and choose a primary source. You have to investigate to understand some context for the origin, the author, et cetera, et cetera. Then you have to actually analyze the source. Then you have to outline what your essay is going to look like. Then you have to create a draft. Then you have to write your essay. Let's have all those steps. If I only have a scale, I can only tell students for that whole process, you can use this level of AI. That's not very granular. And that's going to be hard to have a choice that fully leverages the potential of AI and avoids all of its risks. If I fine tune, I can say, for the first step, you're allowed to use AI up to that level. So maybe that first step, when you research and choose your source and do some research around the source, you can use full AI. Because that's not what I'm assessing. What I'm assessing is, can you critically evaluate that source, right? So that first step, go ahead and use full AI. The second step, which is critically analyzing that source, there can be no AI at this point because I want to make sure that you can do it by yourself. So that first step will be done at home. You can use full AI. Second step will be done in class. And I will need to know that you can do your source analysis in class, and I will have your sort of draft there. Then for the outline and even the draft, you can use AI because I'm not at this point assessing your ability to organize your thoughts into an essay. I'm really just assessing the critical analysis part. So if you still need AI help to put all your thoughts together and create an outline or even a draft, that's fine. The final writing, maybe I want that to happen in class because I also want to assess how well you can express and communicate your learning in the end. So I can be very granular, and I can say at different steps in the assessment process, you are allowed to use different levels of AI. That allows me to leverage all the benefits, mitigate the risks, which is very hard to do if I only have sort of a one-dimensional scale. And the last thing I want to share with you is same model, this time not for assessment, but for learning support. And for learning support in a very broad way, which is not only for students who have sort of a diagnosis and receive sort of actual learning support, but any kind of inclusive learning that looks at student variability and adapts to their different needs. So any kind of tier 1 UDL approach. The only difference would be, so it's the same model. The only difference is that additional step here, right? So I would say, I have my learning objectives. So I still want everybody to be able to critically analyze the source in the end. I still have the same process. I will start by making some sort of engaging introduction. I share the model and they learn about it and they practice and I get feedback. So it's the same process. The extra step is I think, okay, what variability do I have in my class? And what barriers might exist? So I have those 3 students who I know have low English proficiency. I have that student who I know struggles with time management. I have those 2 students I know they have a hard time focusing for long periods of time, whatever it might be, right? So for each step, I now know the different barriers that might exist. I can then be strategic in the way I use AI, knowing, okay, knowing what barriers exist, how might AI help overcome those barriers? How might it help actually worsen the barriers? For some students, AI might be even more of a distraction, or it could also be a support. So again, I can fine tune and be very, very strategic in even what tool use how for which group of students in my class to make sure that at each step they have all the support they need and none of the hindrances or distractions. Right? So very, very granular in the way I integrate AI, making sure it again maximizes benefits and minimizes risks when it comes to learning. So when you receive those slides, which will be at some point today, you will see that last slide where I would very much like if you could give me feedback on the presentation itself, on the content, and in general on AI integration and your experience or some successes that you're having, some tools that you're particularly fond of that you found very, very effective, and any way we can keep collaborating and learning together. I'm very, very much aware that there are no experts in this field, be it only because the knowledge changes every day. So if you were expert yesterday, you're not an expert today anyways, and we're still very much all learning together about it. So thank you very much for joining. If you're here with me and you have any questions right now, I'm happy to stay for a few more minutes and answer them. If not, thank you again so much for joining. If you're interested in also customizing and designing your own tools, we will meet again at 11:40. So that's in about 3 hours. If not, thank you so much for joining this one session and have a great rest of your day.